Good evening, and I'm Wayne Johnson with Doc and Queen Ministry. Today I will be sharing a fatherhood message that was based on a summary of my last sermon that I had last Sunday at our church. I will be coming from Luke 15, chapter 12, to the end of that chapter. It's a very familiar story. It's the story of the prodigal son. And it reads in verse 12, starting with that, a man had two sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. As you heard, the son wanted his portion of his father's estate right then before his father died. Now, ordinarily, what happens is you do not get your inheritance until the person has passed. Now, if you know the story, and I'm sure that many of you do, the next verse goes into the son left to go off to a distant land and waste all of his funds. Then, after that, there was a famine that hit, and the man became, or the young son started working for pennies and basically was homeless. As we skip the verses down to verse 17, that's when the son came to his senses and thought about his father and returning home. He said in verse 18, basically, I will go home to my father. One of the things that I want to point out, because this story that I will be dealing with mostly will be coming from the father's standpoint. If you realize and understand, one thing that we do not give the prodigal son credit for early on in the story is that he knew his worth and his value. And the reason why, because the verse says it. I want my share of the estate. Not only did the son know his worth and value, but he also knew his father's worth and value. See, when we are good fathers, we have brought our children along that they know their worth and value. One, because we've taught them well, but also because the child can see the worth and value we have as fathers in ourselves. Something about a father's love and being home. When in trouble, our kids should be able to reach out to us. But this father, as you read the story, so make sure you go back, Luke chapter 15, starting with verse 12, and just go down to the end of that chapter. The father made sure that he gave his son what he asked for, even though the son wasn't ready for or even needed what he asked for at that time. See, sometimes what a father has to do is allow his son and or daughter to go out there into the world after you've already taught them. Sometimes they still think that they are missing something. So he allowed his son to go out there and experience life and allowed his son to make a bad decision. And the great thing about it is that when the son finally came to his senses, he knew the place to return to his father and his home. The word prodigal. Prodigal means that you were serving God, but now all of a sudden you're no longer serving God, even if you don't realize that you're no longer serving God. See, the prodigal son thought he was old enough, bad enough, big enough to go out there and experience something what he thought he wanted. But what he ended up realizing is there's no place like home. Sounds like the prodigal son came to his senses. What anyone who has ever seen the movie The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy said, there's no place like home. Even when you think about the movie E.T., he wanted to phone home. There's something about home that is special. When we get away from home, and as you see in those verses, verse 14, I believe it was, that the son went to a distant land. I've coached for some years now, and everything being equal, both teams being equal, it is much more difficult to win away than it is when you're at home. There's something special about being at home. The father loved his son so much that he gave him what he wanted even before he actually needed. Father, the father never tried to convince him, say, son, you need to think about what you're doing. No, he allowed the son to go out there and experience life without saving him until the son recognized that he needed to come back home. We must learn how to be that and do that as fathers. Sometimes we just go in and rescue them way too fast. Sometimes we have to allow them to make mistakes so that they can grow from them and learn where they can get their help and who they can depend on, their father who's at home. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 tells us, don't worry about anything, but pray, asking God for everything. See, if you realize in that story, the prodigal son, the son never prayed first about asking his father about getting his inheritance early. He just went on and asked anyway. The father wants us to pray about everything so we can make good decisions. That's why in the last video I said one of the things that's important of being a proper father is knowing God, loving yourself, loving the mother of your child, and loving your own mother. It's so important how the father allowed his son to sit in his mess before the son came back home. Father never reached out, never sent nobody. He allowed the son to learn and grow. That is a wonderful father. Now, you do know that the representation in this prodigal son, that the father was God Almighty, who is our example as fathers. I hope that you've learned and been able to take something from this lesson. I thank you for your time. I hope to talk to you soon and take care of yourself. Goodbye.